Welcome back, everyone. It is Sunday sit-down time. Joining me tonight at Columbia Tribune's Eric Blum. How you doing? Just saw you in Fayetteville, but how was the trip back?
Easy. It's the shortest SEC trip, and I was thinking about it on the drive there. It's like I'd be halfway to Tennessee by now, and I'm already here. So it was a very nice, easy trip and a good Thanksgiving for sure.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. You know, speaking of that trip to Fayetteville, obviously not how Eli Drinkwitz would have hoped it had gone, but, you know, kind of a little bit of expected against this Arkansas team that we've seen this year. Overall, I know it's still pretty fresh, but how would you kind of recap this season for the Tigers overall? There's a lot that happened, but how would you recap it?
This is a regression, but it's a regression that needs the proper context. 6-6, it's still an even record coming off of last year where there was already an even record. But there were so many more distractions, and it looked really favorable, kind of glass half full with an even record, kind of glass half empty, I would think, this year. And you just have to look back, and I think the tide turned early. Missouri just never recovered. The loss to Kentucky, the loss to Boston College, and then the free fall against Tennessee really changed the view of the season. And Missouri did the best damage control possible by getting to a bowl, but that's all it could be. And I think that this is really kind of just still kind of R&D, kind of just really scouting out what you need to do for the future for Missouri football. Short term, not good. Long term, we'll see, because last year looks really good in hindsight. This year, still kind of the jury's out a little bit. I think that Tyler Beatty has absolutely won himself so many favors, going from doubted a little bit to now, I think, almost guaranteed NFL draft pick coming in April. And so it's now just a matter of where do they go and how do they replace the other people like a Mike Maietti going forward and kind of building up now with Drinkwitz's guys and his culture in year 3, I think. So because of that, regardless of how the bowl situation goes, that is going to put a lot of determining factor on how actually year 2 is remembered.
Well, one of the interesting things that happened this season, I think, was when Eli Drinkwitz, I can't remember which game it was, but he said, maybe I had last year kind of set expectations really high, you know what I mean? And this is what that second year, do you feel like this was what maybe should have happened last year, but now we're getting it this year, and it's kind of the building of Eli Drinkwitz?
So that was after the Texas A&M game where he said you can't skip steps. And that was compared to last year. It was like they're closing the gap with Florida and Georgia. Georgia is now the undoubted number 1 team in the country. Florida just hired Billy Napier. So you have to look and kind of see with the proper context. Missouri did go to 3rd to 4th in the SEC East, and so I think that Eli Drinkwitz himself kind of has to still reel it in. He's still only, it's his 3rd year as a college head coach. And that's a great thing because he brings a lot of life and new energy. But I think even internally, he knows he's still kind of figuring this thing out a little bit. You don't have the experience of a Jimbo Fisher or Nick Saban. And there's a lot of coaches around the league. And he looks to Mark Stoops and said it a lot before the Kentucky game. Mark Stoops, I think he's finishing up his 8th year at Kentucky now. There's just so much knowledge you gain every year, especially when you're the longest tenured member on staff in Columbia, that there just isn't there at Mizzou right now. And that's not a bad thing if you were to be winning, but some of the shortcomings appear to be coming out. And so it appears that a couple things are true. There's still so much room for Eli to go, but maybe the cupboard was even a little more bare, minus the Larry Roundtrees and the Nick Boltons, than when Barry Odom left. So a lot of steps have already been taken, but there's way more to go.
Well, speaking of way more to go, I think one lackluster part of the season, definitely the quarterback situation. You know, you look at Connor Bazelak, what's happened with him this season. Do you feel like it's a regression of sorts from what we've seen last year? You know, what are your thoughts on Connor Bazelak? Maybe what's next year look like here?
So Connor Bazelak, I think, hasn't really been 100% health-wise, maybe since the Kentucky game, to be completely honest with you. And even subconsciously, maybe mentally, if he's not 100%, maybe that affects your performance a little bit. Maybe defenses figured him out a little bit more this year. But whatever it is, it appears that Connor Bazelak still has the faith from the locker room and from Eli Drinkwitz, which means way more than anything on the outside, in my opinion, or anything. And that's what matters. But I think that he's just has a little bit thinner of a rope.
I'm curious your thoughts on the bowl game, though obviously that would get a lot of goodwill from the fans, like you mentioned, getting a win there. Do you have any predictions, any thoughts on what this bowl might look like?
No. To be completely honest with you, no. It's funny because CBS Sports came out with a prediction today saying that Missouri would play Toledo in the Quick Lane Bowl, which is Missouri replacing Big Ten because the Big Ten does not have enough to fill all their bowl slots. And then Toledo is being rumored to already go somewhere else. So this is just silly season in that way for a reason. I think Missouri would end up in the lower tier of bowls for the SEC's tie-ins, or they could be going literally anywhere. It's incredibly hard to predict, but if you want to put me on the spot, I'll go the Music City Bowl, even though it's a little bit higher up, and then they get a Big Ten team there. So maybe Maryland, maybe Wisconsin there, I don't know. That could happen.
Of all the bowls, I think I would complain the least about going to the Music City Bowl. I'd be fine with the Music City Bowl. I don't know about you.
Going to Florida would be cool for me. I'd like that.
All right. Well, when you look at the men's basketball team, shifting gears here a little bit, overall thoughts, we're still early in the season, but obviously a lot of ups and downs already for Conzo Martin's group. What are your thoughts on what they've been going through so far?
It looks to be just a tough year for them right now. When you have Boogie Coleman and then really not another true point guard who can just really center the team and get them through adversity, and then you don't have really a center who can really, play like Jeremiah Tillman. It's just obvious at both bookends that Missouri just does not have that consistent, reliable guy right now. And while I think that it's still early in the season, they're 3-3. They got a good game tomorrow night. They probably will go 4-3 against Paul Quinn College. There's just some concern about how can this team compete in the SEC when you look around to most other teams and it's like, okay, they have a good center, they have a good point guard. Where are Missouri's? And I do think that a by-committee approach and I do believe Conzo, there are several guys who they trust in those roles. It's just where's the chemistry? Where is the, just the cohesion going to come from? And you have to keep in mind, Border War is in what now, 13 days?
December 11th, yes.
Yeah, and Kansas looked really good. I know they lost a Dayton, but they look to have a really deep, good squad featuring the Columbia kid, DeJuan Harris, at point guard for them. Or I think he's more shooting guard, actually. But you just look and see a lot of those different things, and it's like, wow. Missouri is kind of falling back a little bit this year, and, cohesion with the transfer portal, that was always a concern. But it's proven to be an even bigger one than a lot of people, I think thought. Thus far in the season, when you lose that game to Kansas City like that just a lot of the alarm bells go off, and Missouri hasn't done anything so positive in the other direction yet that you can't still look back and say, okay, some of the faults from that still exist.
Well, looking on the women's side, they've had a heck of a start to the season, 7-0 after today's game. Early thoughts on Robin Pinchton's group this year?
Exactly what the men looked like. I think the women were there about a year ago, and you have to understand that Asia Blackwell is up to her game, Haley Frank is up to her game, Lauren Hansen's up to her game. I think the addition of Izzy Higginbottom has been great for them, and so I just think that it elevated everything across the board, and kind of the lumps they took in throwing the Haley Franks and the Asia Blackwells into the fire early, now at the other end of it are kind of paying off for them. They look like an NCAA tournament team. They look like a team that they don't have that absolute, to lack of a better word, Sophie Cunningham, who just can drown out and really just take over everything. And Asia Blackwell is just not that type of player. She's dynamic in a very different way, but the magic kind of looks a little bit of the same. So at the end of the day, this looks like an NCAA tournament team that they just have to get through their season, and if they win half of the SEC games, they're in. It's just a matter of now just not collapsing for them and continuing what they've built. I think they're a team with very little holes. Maybe only the South Carolinas of the world, maybe Mississippi States of the world can kind of expose. But other than that, they're in that next tier down, I think. Not the elite of the conference, but right there. And that's exactly where they should be when they haven't been to an NCAA tournament since, I think, the 2019 was Sophie's senior year with Sierra and Lauren Aldridge. And so I think that this is a great start. Obviously, not losing is a really good start. But it's more so how they've won. That Idaho State game was really impressive, how they kind of came out sluggish and then just turned it on out of nowhere. And so performances like that really will build up the program.
I'm excited to see what they come up with the rest of the year. Obviously, the schedule's going to get tougher as it goes, but I think a lot to look forward to for Pinchton's group. Well, Eric, I appreciate your time. I hope you have a good rest of your night.
You too. Thank you.
For the rest of you guys, we'll be back after this.